Shut up and sit down.
Hello guys, it's Andy from Big Mac's Workshop and Painting Studio, and we're doing a reshoot of a video what we took in 2016, which is a Night Lord's Contemptor Dreadnought. Now we're going to be doing the chipping as was recorded in the AK Interactive videos. So I started off with a nice rich brown, which I believe is Rhinox hide, and going straight over the black prime as I normally would do. Once I've got good coverage of Rhinox hide, I'm going over the top of that in a sporadic pattern of using Vallejo's light rust. Sorry, Vallejo's dark rust. I will get it right. And you do an additional layer with Vallejo's light rust over the top in more highlight regions. It just gives you a nice layer of multi-tonal rusts for when you actually apply the chipping techniques. So here we are, using the light rust now. And once I've got over the top of that with the in the areas I want it, I will then hit it with a gloss varnish. I use gloss for this. You can use matte if that's all you've got. It's just gloss tends to be a little bit stronger, and you want a nice solid varnish underneath your chipping fluid. Once you've got the gloss varnish down and it's nice and dry, you go straight over the top with the AK Interactive chipping fluid. We're using the heavy chipping. There's various different types what you can use. Heavy chipping tends to be perfectly adequate for what we want. After you've got the chipping fluid down, it's back to painting, and we are using Vallejo's deep Prussian blue as the base colour for the vehicle. I use this for a lot of my Night Lord stuff. It's my go-to paint for Night Lords. It just is a real rich colour, what you wouldn't get with sort of Cantor blue. It's very, very sort of a deep blue sort of midnighty colour. This is then highlighted up in the upper regions using Untitled blue. Now I've been very, very careful in building the layers up really, really slowly, just applying the paint to the edges and the hot spots to give it a sort of natural shine. And I'm just building them colours up really, really gently. It's important to take your time, because otherwise, especially with an airbrush, because if you make a mistake, you tend to make a mistake on a large area. And as we always say, you can do anything we do with an airbrush by hand, it's just quicker. So I'm just building on them highlighted areas, just adding a little bit more of the Untitled blue, just to bring out them corners. So yeah, obviously, as you know, we've been away from tutorials for a little while, so it's good to be back again and back at it. Okay, so now I'm going from a 45-degree angle from below with a mix of black and deep Prussian blue. This adds a nice layer of shading to the recesses, give you that real nice transition of colour. So now I'm using a GW layer brush, and this is just pure Untitled blue for the first edge highlights. Now, you wouldn't think this stand out with it being Untitled on the as a raised colour of the airbrushing, but it does. It stands out quite just right. It really adds a nice crisp edge to your highlighting. For the next layer, I'm adding a bit of Fenrisian grey into the mix. I'm using really, really thin paint, essentially a glaze, because I'm just mixing straight from the thin paint from the airbrush. I'm using that for the edge highlights. So as you can see, it's a very, very thin paint. And I'm adding these again to the real fine detail corners, just getting them hot spots looking real shiny. You don't want to go too far if you wanted to go for that deep colours, but it always looks good to get them nice hot highlights. So back to Yellow Top Blue again, and I'm using that for the base layer of the lightning. Now, I have not done much lightning, definitely not done any on my own until this point, so it was quite a bit of a learning curve. I spent a few minutes just practicing around on a piece of paper at the side, and it's really simple. Just let the brush guide you, let it just add natural curves. You don't want straight lines wherever anywhere really, because it will look a bit of a mess. So once I've got the lines in the areas, I'm adding a touch of white to my sky blue, and that just adds for a nice sort of subtle blue glow effect. And I'm not going all the way through. I'm breaking it up. I'm using the same sort of following the original patterns, but I'm using a brighter colour to make it stand out. It looks like you've got like a double line. After that, it is pretty much pure white. It's just a touch of blue left in that white, and they're just into the joins where the lightning meets itself. So the real hot lightning strikes areas. And now we're on to the chipping. Now it's a damp brush. Obviously you can see it's a GW large dry brush, because I wanted something fairly soft. I didn't want to take off too much paint, and I'm using this just to pull the paint from the figure into to allow the rusted paintwork to show through. And this is a really cool effect, because you can really build up as much as you want onto the model, or you can keep it fairly simple. Okay, and I'm working on the metal work. The trim was done in Vallejo's beaten copper, and I'm now currently washing it with a bit of Agrax, because let's face it, we all know Agrax is pretty much win. And the skulls on the on the vehicle were painted based off with Karak stone, using the standard GW method of going through Karak to Ushabti to eventually Screaming Skull. And the flayed skin was using a base of Tusker fur, which you've probably seen me use on several videos now. I tend to use it without a wash wherever I can. Obviously, as you know, I'm using very thin paint. All my initial layers dry up fairly patchy, so I'm just getting a couple of good thin coats on there just to make it stand out better. Once the Tusker fur, the beaten copper, and what have you is all dry, including the skulls, there's a couple of good Agrax washes across the entire thing, including the wings, which were done in burnt red. So after a little while waiting for several layers of wash to dry, I start work on the skin work. Now this is a mix of Cadian flesh tone and Tusker fur, and I'm just adding it to the areas, trying to stay away from the stitch sections wherever possible. It just brings out that sort of natural sort of flesh sort of look. Now I was tempted with doing this as a sort of a rotting flesh, but I didn't know what my customer wanted, so I just went for a generic flesh look rather than something a bit more exotic.
And he was quite happy with that.
And yes, he was happy with what we went for. Now, I've not got the best camera angle here, you can't quite see what I'm doing. But what I'm actually doing is highlighting shading the flayed heads on the thing. So not actually skulls, the flayed heads, and I've thrown some blood red, a red wash onto it, make it look a bit more fresh. Same with the skin tones as well. I'm throwing some red into the into the recess areas, making the flesh look a bit more fresh, as if it's a recent victim rather than something that's been there for a little while. And again, back to highlighting. This is a mix of Cadian and Light Flesh. Light Flesh is a really good colour for highlighting flesh tones with. It keeps that pinky sort of skin coloured look on white flesh, while giving you a natural highlight. I'll just mix this together with a bit of about 50-50 with Cadian. And on the scroll work, I'm using the same colours as I use on the skulls. I wanted a sort of a bone colour for that. I thought it seemed appropriate. As you can see, I did the helmet separate. Again, this was done in the same sort of manner. The Carrick stone with an Agrax wash, then going up gently with the thin layers of Upshabti bone, just to pick out the detail and get a nice smooth sort of a skull coloured layer. And after that, it is pretty much pure Screaming Skull. I've kept the paint particularly thin for this, so I can control where the paint's going better without getting any streaks or lumps. It's important to thin your paints down plenty, even for just base painting. You don't want it looking thick and horrible. So, burnt red, going back over the wash of the wings, and I start mixing a touch of blood red into it for the highlights, and this I'm deliberately keeping quite dark. I wanted it to be more of a brooding sort of wing colour. Here we are, I'm just adding some final highlights to the skull using just a touch of white and ivory in the Screaming Skull. I tend not to use whites where possible. I like to use off-whites, as they tend to have a lot of, as that little bit of colour gives that paint a bit more of a rich lift. So now I'm using about 50-50 mix of blood red and burnt red. Just keeping it aimed towards the raised areas on the wings, but I'm trying to get it into some of the recesses, so it's sort of more of a blended highlight. You don't want it to look too stark at any point, so otherwise it just looks a mess. The brass work, now I'm using the Leo's brass actually for the trim. This goes on really nicely over the Hatton copper. Get a real sort of nice brass slash gold look. Work well for trim work, where you don't need too much in the way of metals. The problem with the doing it that way is it can go a bit too far. So here we are. This is a finished product of the Nightlord Contemptor. Much better paint job than the one I painted only 2 years ago. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. Please feel free to get in touch with us if you want any tips or hints. If you've got anything to say, get it on there on the comments board. Hit like, hit subscribe, and share with your friends. Take care, guys. See you later.